Hi, Phoenix Warrior. I wanted to talk about more about forgiveness. I had did a video, computer, somewhere on there somewhere. So I wanted to talk about two different experiences in my life that really helped with forgiveness. And a little bit of background. My mom I had a bunch of different things wrong with her, but at the time, none of us knew. And just to give you a little bit of the background, wasn't until I was probably about 25, 26 that I got her to go in front of my doctor. I asked for a favor. I worked with her, and I said, "There's just something not right about my mom. She's just not the normal mom." And I really didn't like my mom. I was very mad at her. In a nutshell, when my father had passed when we were three, my mom met my dad when she was like 16. He was 15 years older than her. And they got married when she was 19, had me when she was 20, had my brother when she was 21. And then my father had passed away in a truck accident. Somebody, cut his brakes, whatever. And he was killed. And she was 22. And it was like 4 days before their wedding anniversary, like May 24th or something like that. They got married like May 28th. But one of the lessons that I learned from my mom is my mom used to always tell me, and it never made sense until I was older, never say anything that you can't take back. Never say anything mean to somebody, like words have like power. And my mom never studied or learned personal growth or development or whatever, right? So it's not like she learned that lesson, read it in a book or, speaker. It was just from life experience. And that because her and my dad got into a wicked fight a couple days before, and they were planning on moving to BC. And his parents were driving the car with me and my brother, my mom, and we were following my dad, and he had a truck with all their stuff and belongings in it. And we were driving out by Jasper, heading into like towards BC or whatever, and through the mountains and whatnot. And when he was going around a corner of a mountain, the brakes went, and he couldn't stop or slow down and went over the cliff. But my mom and dad could never take back those words that they said. My mom had to live with the fact that they got into a huge fight, and they both said really, really nasty things to each other. And one of the things, my mom, heat of anger, I don't know the exact words, but it was something like, "I wish I'd never married you. I hate you. I wish you were dead," blah, blah, things that some of us say when we're mad and we're upset. We don't really mean it, but, So my mom always held on to that. And after that, she would never like be as mean or say things to certain people in case, she couldn't take it back. Sometimes she said some things to me, which, caused me to be very upset and hurt and mad at her and that. And for why, I was, hated her, honestly. I, even in high school, most people didn't know that she was my mom. And when I filled out all the paperwork at the school, I said my mom was deceased with my dad, kind of thing. And that had my grandparents as my parents. So some of my school friends that met me later on didn't know my mom was my mom and all of that kind of stuff. So I held on to it for quite a long time. Then, like, we ended up in foster care. She was a single mom. She dated an alcoholic. Like, we went through all the, struggles and challenges and different things, and all the reasons I thought I could justify why I was mad at her, why I didn't like her. And, being in foster care and, she gave me to my grandparents and stuff like that. And in hindsight, after I got her, the doctor to look at her, it's because she had gained a lot of weight and then lost a lot of weight, and she was losing her hair. And I didn't know at the time what it meant of being OCD and certain mental illnesses and things like that. So as a young kid, and me and my brother, we'd pull pranks on her all the time. My brother was a prankster, so we would, prank and all that stuff. She'd have a coffee table that, like for an example, coffee table, only have 3 things on it, and have her ashtray and the TV remote and the TV guide. I dated myself back there, and they would be in the exact same spots, and you could measure it where they were. And it's not like she measured it and put it there. She just knew exactly where they needed to be, and they had to be that way. And I thought it was kind of funny, and my friends would, kind of laugh too. I would move them on her, shift them around and stuff like that. And like, she would lose it. Like, and anybody that's OCD totally understands that, and they can just feel that angst and what it does to them on an energetic and emotional level. It's kind of cruel, honestly, to do that to somebody that's OCD, right? And my grandmother had a little bit of it too. You had to check the doors 3 times, make sure they're locked and all this different stuff. And after a while, I just started doing these things and doing things particular because I just didn't want to listen to either one of them, bug me, nag me, get upset with me or whatever. It was just easier just to do it than to have to deal with it. Unless you felt like, bugging them or something like that. So, when I took her to the doctor and we found out that she had like 5 autoimmune disorders. She had MS, alopecia. Alopecia is where you lose all of your hair. She had no hair on her body, which never made no sense to us, but we just, that's just the way she was born. And her hair on her head was very thin, and over the years, she would lose it. She also had, she'd get really nervous and anxious, and she'd grab her hair and she'd like knot it, and there's a mental thing, I forget what it's called, but she would pull out her hair too, which damages it and then doesn't come back on top of the alopecia. And by the time I was probably 35 or so, she ended up going bald. We just shaved her. It was just easier, and she looked really good bald. It was a blessing for her. And then the MS, damaged legs and her bladder and bowels and all the stuff that MS does. And she had a slow progressive one. So she was very lucky, grateful on that aspect that it didn't take her in 5 to 6 years, that sometimes it can. She was diagnosed when she was like 45, and she passed when she was 69, I think, 68, something like that, a couple of years ago. So, yeah, 3 years ago. So she had it for good 20 years with it, slow, progressive. She also had manic depressant, bipolar, where, when you're happy, you're like extremely happy. When you're really sad, you're like extremely sad. She also had sociopath tendencies. The other thing with that is that she didn't really have emotion. So it made sense after the fact of why she wasn't that typical mom of very like nurturing or loving, or that, could express how she felt and her emotions and stuff. She learned over time, when you're at a birthday party, you smile, you should be happy, you should look happy. You know, when you're at a funeral, you should look sad, you know, shed a tear, you know. Sometimes those emotions did come up. She actually did feel them, and sometimes she didn't. It was just the way it was. So she had a lot of different things with her, and that one of the things too that I learned in the journey, and to be able to forgive her, was two things. Like I was saying, um, with my brother, on the other aspect, he ended up in the drug world and went down the wrong road, and he was my mom's kind of favorite, and she kind of babied him, and I ended up with my grandparents, and the aunts and uncles all doted on me, so she almost kind of doted on him, thinking it was only fair. And that, so he went down that pathway. And if you ever deal with somebody that is deals with addiction, it's a long road and a lot of different emotions and upsets, and you get frustrated and angry, and then you feel guilty and that, and you almost feel like you're drowning, and you just don't know how to get out of it. You don't know how to help them. You can't help them if they don't want to help themselves. And a lot of times family members, family, loved ones, friends, you end up enabling them to continue the pattern. And as hard as it is, most times you just got to let them hit rock bottom and want to make a change, and you know, try to get as much resources and things that you can to be able to help them. um, and sometimes if you can't catch them at that right moment, unfortunately you don't, and 9 times out of 10 they don't make it. So one of the things that I think forgiveness and grief kind of go hand in hand. I mean, it has in my life, and that. So one of the things you guaranteed, if you're here, you took a breath and you're living, and you need to do the best that you can and make the best of it. On the flip side, none of us are getting out alive. We're all at some point going to check out, going to pass away. Hopefully, all of us at a very, very long life. And when we do, we leave with no regrets, or very, very little. That's my goal. Very, very little regrets. I don't have too many, actually. And because of a lot of the experiences I've had, it's taught me not to have regrets. I have a few. And you take those lessons that you learn and you do better. When you know better, you do better. You know, I love that quote from Maya. And it's so true. So with my brother, um, one of the reasons why I wanted to bring that up and talk more about it, not too many people talk about, you know, that side of the addiction and everything like that. Our upbringing, my mom was almost like my sister or my child. A lot of times I took care of her because of her situation and who she was. She couldn't be a mother to me. I basically was her sister up until a certain time. I mean, I was raised by my grandparents, so they treated the three of us equally. So my brother was like my brother, and my mom was kind of like my sister. And then when I hit a certain age, I took care of her and mothered her. And that, so she was never really my mom. And I never really knew what a mom felt like. My grandmother was my grandmother, but she was also kind of like a mom, but never really had that mom experience, mother-daughter experience. Uh, I lived in foster home for a couple of years, and absolutely the woman, you know, is like a saint, beautiful woman. Took in a bunch of children. I think emotionally it does a lot to you. Um, but other than that little time frame of having a mom, she did like the mothering things, and she treated us all the same. Like, you would swear that we were her kids when we were there. and that. So you get a little bit of, but I was young. We were like, between 6 and 10, 11 in that age. So, you only get that little bit of that time to kind of have that experience. So with my mom, I basically, like I said, I mothered her. Plus, I had a lot of anger, a lot of upset, a lot of like, why couldn't you be like other mothers? My life is the way it is because of you, kind of thing, which a lot of us go through. And that, and I kept a lot of it hidden and secret because back in the day, talk openly about things. And I learned really quick that if you do discuss certain things or tell certain people, then you either get judged or you get looked at a certain way, or you could get into trouble and that. So I learned, not to. And two, I didn't want people knowing that I thought my mother was batshit crazy and did some off the wall crazy things. And I didn't, I was embarrassed and shamed and didn't want anybody to know. And it wasn't until over the last few years that I openly, told a few people, even some of the people that I went to school with and I talked to. Some of them knew, some of them didn't. Some of them didn't have a clue. And that, and back then you didn't openly talk about mental illness or abuse or all those kind of things. My brother went through a lot of abuse because he wasn't always with me and my grandparents, and that. So when my brother went down that road and got involved in drugs, and basically, in a nutshell, he got arrested, so he had to go to court and stuff like that. And in the drug world, they fear those things. So they put a hit on him and they killed him. Up until that point, there's moments, and most people won't ever say, in grief, you have to go through all the emotions. You have to go through all the stages. There is going to be, anger. There is going to be, I can say it in blended families or in families in general. If you're dealing with somebody with an addiction, if you're dealing with somebody that was abusive, you're dealing with blended families where people are split up and you lose one of them. Every single person has said something that they really wish that they didn't. Everybody would be thinking things that they wouldn't. I mean, I can only speak from my experience. I know that there was days and moments. I can almost say with almost every family member that has passed that we had to take care of or something like that you were going through, there's those moments where you're like, I just wish this was done. I wish this was over. I can't do this anymore because we have like a breaking point, and it's normal. I want people to really understand that it's a normal emotion to feel that way. Now, if you act on it, obviously not, but a lot of people don't want to talk about those emotions, those feelings that you have. It's normal. We're not cruel. We're not mean. We're not batshit crazy. It's a normal human emotion. And over the years, I held on to a lot of guilt and a lot of regret because I thought, oh my God, I was a horrible person because I even thought that. I know with my brother, there'd be so many times you get a call in the middle of the night, most times because he was arrested, needed my help, or I had to go bail him out or whatever, and you just get so frustrated. But in the back of your mind, you're like wondering, when is that phone call going to come? That's the last phone call. When is that phone call going to happen to say, hey, he didn't make it? Something happened. And you dread that call. But in the back of your mind, almost every single day, as it's going further and further and further, getting closer to that time. And I really hope no one has to experience that. But reality is that there's a lot of people out there that are dealing with addictions or abuse or depression or mental illness or different things. And a lot of us get that phone call that we really don't want to get. And a lot of us don't know how to deal with it, don't know how to handle with it. And the people around us don't know how to deal with it and don't know how to handle it. I mean, that's a whole other topic of how people will treat you, or because they just don't know any better. A lot of grace. So yeah, there was times where I just sat there and went, I cannot live one more day with him doing this to himself. I just wish it was done. I wish it was over. And then the day that I got the phone call to tell me that that was it, then you have all those emotions and all that stuff, and you sit back and go, oh, did I do this? Did I put it out there? Did I cause this? Oh, I wish I never said that. And you beat yourself up and you feel really guilty. I should have done more. I should have talked to him. I should have taken him somewhere. I should have this, I should have, could have, would have. One of the saving graces for me in finding my spirituality and why I just embrace this and love this so much. And even if this is all just, I'm batshit crazy and none of this means none of this kind of stuff, I'd rather be on the pathway of believing in spirituality and that my loved ones are around me and that can communicate with me and they're happy than the alternative, that there is nothing, that all this meant nothing, and that they're like in pain or they're like in a hell kind of thing. Who wants to think that of their family members, especially if, you know, like my brother was killed, or ones that have taken their life, or ones that have died in a horrific accident, traumatic, died way too soon. I don't care if too soon was, you know, 5, 10, 20, 30, 50, 100. You know, some of them, my mom was in her late 60s and she didn't want to die, and that she wasn't ready. So when you see that with somebody and they're not ready and they fear and they think that it's really bad on the other side, that's horrific. To have to comfort and nurture that person to tell them, no, you're going to be okay. And deep down inside, you're hoping to God that it's true, because the alternative, I don't even want to think that. I would rather be on woohoo side, on the spiritual side, that they're happy, they're dancing, and they're having fun, and that now I got a bunch of people to protect me. So I'd rather be on that side. It makes living here, makes it have meaning. It makes it, you know, it helps you go through the grief process. There was a lot of life lessons that my grandfather taught me at a very, very young age that really didn't make any sense. And it makes a lot more sense now than it did even back then. And yeah, so like with my brother, I held on to a lot of guilt, a lot of grief. It put me on the pathway of forgiveness. It put me on a pathway to learn spirituality, and it put me on personal growth and everything like that. And thank goodness, I firmly believe it was part of our divine, you know, soul contract. He only wanted to be here for a short time, and that changed my whole direction. It changed how I thought about certain things, and how for the next person that I was with, and children and careers and everything. And if that experience hadn't happened, I don't know where my life would be right now. It wouldn't be where it is, and I wouldn't have had the children that I had. I would have had two, and that basically is it, kind of thing. So that whole experience. So with my brother, after he passed, I struggled, and I wanted to find meaning out of it. And I started searching and looking, and it wasn't until 3 or 4 months later that my lesson in forgiveness, and I just kind of stumbled on it, honestly. It wasn't like some great epiphany. I'm like all great wisdom and, I know what I was doing. And it really didn't even make sense until years later when you get that aha moment. And I was dealing with my mom, that it clicked and went, oh my goodness, because we overcomplicate things. And honestly, a lot of these things that we can teach you, how to write a letter or how to do certain things, technically, you don't need any of it. Really, you don't. We overcomplicate it. However, because we're human and because we need a process, we need some way of doing things, you just have to find the right way for you. Some people, like when someone passes and stuff, you have the funeral. I think a lot of people are missing the boat. It's one of the lessons, actually, that works with forgiveness, works with grief. It helps with grief. And as crazy as it sounds, my grandfather had told me, started when I was like 8, 10 years old, really, really young. Even at the age of 3, actually, when my father passed away, he got me right involved. I know I was 3 years old, said and showed a few things and stuff. He wanted me to understand that death was a natural part of life. And that if you realize it's a natural part of life and there's a process that you have to go through, you won't hang on to it for years. We see it all the time on Facebook. I share pictures of my mom and my grandmother, but I'm not like, there's some people that they're stuck in their grief. They're hanging on to guilt. They're hanging on to regret. They're hanging on to all of this stuff because they're stuck in one of the stages, because they didn't do one of the processes. And it's not a like step 1, step 2, step 3. You may have to do it a couple of times. You may have to do it for years. You may have to only do it for weeks. Each single person is different in their grief process and how they do it. And grief is a loss of a job. Grief is a loss of a relationship. Grief is losing a loved one. Ending a relationship, losing a friendship, changing your whole job career, changing your house, losing your house, losing your vehicle, having a car accident in your favorite vehicle. Like, people don't realize that every single one of those things is a grief, and you have to go through the stages. Like, for an example, if you had a car accident, you usually get mad, you're upset. Whose fault is it? And then some people, when it's their fault, they don't want to admit it was their fault. They're in denial. It's one of the stages of grief. Then you just come to that place of acceptance, and that kind of thing. And you go through the stages of it and that. And most people don't realize that you have to do that with everything. When you finish school, end school, start school, move into this place, move into that place. And sometimes when they don't affect us as much, we just kind of go through it really quick and fast and we're good to go. When it takes us a little bit longer. And one of the things that my grandfather had taught me was that it's a whole process of when you plan the service and you're planning the things, because you can go through those stages of grief when you're actually planning it and doing it. And you can, when you know what their wishes are, which really helps if you've had the conversations, which I believe every family and friends and stuff should have those conversations. They should all know what your wishes are. You should know what the people around you, what their wishes are. It really helps and stops a lot of the bickering and the fighting and the things that happens when everybody's emotions is high. I knew this person better, whatever. So one, you know what everybody is wanting and done, and then you can do it, and then it's a way that you can honor that person. It's a way that you can show that you care and you love, and that's a whole process of it. I don't think they need to be, really sad and really, really heavy. um, One of the things that my grandparents and that you honor and you're respectful, you show their character and stuff, but put, we pick a few songs in ours. You do the celebration of life, the slideshow with all the different pictures and the memories and stuff, and you have a song that honors them and stuff like that, maybe reflect their personality or maybe their favorite song. And then when they're leaving, my grandmother always said that one of the saddest things that she thought in a lot of the funerals, that it just seems so heavy. And then there's all the church songs and the really sad songs. And when you're leaving, it still feels kind of heavy and this and that. And you should kind of celebrate a bit of their life kind of thing. And so we pick, a song that, kind of brings a smile to our face and laugh. And it usually has some kind of, humor or something to it. Like for an example, my grandmother loved the song from Dolly Parton and Brad Paisley. And that was on her slideshow, which me and the kids most time can never listen to that song because it always brings the emotion and everything else. She told us years, I think when the song first came out, she seen it on an award show. She goes, "That's the song I'm having at my service." I'm like, really? I couldn't listen to that song after that. It was done because every time I heard that song, I could envision her at her service. So yeah, so I avoid that song. But my grandparents used to dance, and they loved all the different ones, but they loved Conway Twitty and stuff like that. And my grandfather had this little joke with my grandmother when they would dance some of his songs. So when we were taking her casket out of the service, it was Conway Twitty, "I Love to Lay You Down." Oxymoron, kind of, but they used to love to dance, and he used to always say that she was the only woman he'd ever want to be with and lay her down and all that kind of stuff. So it brought a little bit of a chuckle and this and that. And in the moment, some of us, you're in the emotion in the moment of it, so you're not really going to hear it or whatever. But now when we hear that song, it just kind of makes me chuckle. I offended a few people, of course, because that's not how we've been taught. But when you bring a little bit of humor and remember the good kind of thing, it lightens it, and it's not so heavy. And that's one of the things that we always had in our family, that we would make, jokes and lighten the mood and that. So with that, when you're going through those different stages, you need to accept that. You need to accept there's those different emotions, those different things. And like I was saying with my brother, that I was so mad at my mom because I blamed her. So it was part of the grief, right? I was blaming her in denial and anger and all of that, that it was her fault. She made certain choices that, caused my brother to do that. But we were raised by the same person. I didn't make those choices. I didn't have that life. My brother did. So it wasn't my mom. It was his choices and that. So another piece of learning, forgiveness. So with my brother, how I actually learned the forgiveness was 4 months later. The person that took my brother's life took his own life. And at first, yeah, I was mad. I was mad the whole time, mad and bitter and upset. And, I could have probably strangled him myself. If I had probably physically seen him, I probably would have strangled him myself. I was so upset and mad and that. But when I got the call that this guy had taken his own life and they were doing a service or something for him, it's in the paper, something in me was like, I need to look at this person that took, my brother's life. And because I was raised to be very respectful at a funeral and stuff like that, I thought that's probably the safest place for me to be. Is, because I'm not going to do anything that's going to cause harm or upset to a family, because I've been through enough of them. I wouldn't want to do that. But I showed up, and in that moment, I had such compassion and upset and hurt for him because nobody was there. Nobody showed up. Apparently, he had a sister, and she didn't show up. She wasn't there. He had parents, and I'm not judging them, because I totally understand when you're dealing with somebody with addictions, the things that they can do to you, and the upset, and day after day of you worrying and this and that. Most likely, he put them through, through hell and back. But I thought how heartbreaking it is, and so sad that here this young man that was only like 26, 27 years old. My brother was 26 when he was killed. They're about the same age. And nobody was there. Not one person. Not any of the friends. Not any family members. None. And it was in the paper, and the sad part about it is that when family don't take care of a loved one, the city has to, and it's not pretty. Um, you know, they just do what they're obligated to do, and that's it. But in that moment, I realized, because, and I'm not going to say like they didn't care, but they didn't care enough, and they didn't have responsibility, because at the end of the day, they raised him. They made certain choices that put him on a certain pathway. And I'm not blaming them. That's not what it is. They didn't take any ownership or any responsibility that they brought this child into the world, and circumstances happened, and their child did harm to other people, and most likely to them too. But they didn't take no ownership, and that. But the sad part about it is that will haunt them. They will have that guilt and that remorse, because once it's done, it's done. They didn't get no closure. They didn't get to say goodbye. They didn't get any of that process for them to heal, which is really sad and really unfortunate. So it's one of the things my grandfather taught me, that in that process, in order for your forgiveness, in order to remove guilt and regrets, there is a process. They were very, very wise way back then, when they invited people over to the home, and you make stuff, and then you have the casket out and you get to look at it, because that's another thing. When you see, there's the whole thing. Should the casket be open or not open? I can say in my own experience, I've been to a lot of funerals, and there's one that was a closed casket, and we didn't get to see them because my grandmother was so hurt and upset by my grandfather. There's a small part of you that doesn't get a complete closure, to feel that they're like really gone. And I've learned that over the years of going through the different processes and going to services, when you see them, it just does something to help you with the closure. So a lot of the people that are doing celebrations of life, and they're doing them in community centers or wherever, and I don't care where you do it, as long as you do it somewhere. But when you don't go through a process of they had a reason why they did the funerals and the services the way that they did. It actually helps you go through the grief process. I can say that from experience, because any of the ones that I didn't get to go to a service or funeral, there's an unfinished thing there. It just doesn't feel complete. It just doesn't feel like they're really gone. You know they're gone. You don't get to experience them or talk to them or whatever, but it's too easy for you to put in your mind of, oh yeah, they're just busy. They're just over there. They just moved over here. You can and go through life and not really deal with it. But your body and your mind and your heart and your soul knows that you're not dealing with it. And when you don't physically see them in a casket, and that it does something to you, that it doesn't completely feel done, doesn't feel completely that closure, that process. And I just remember my grandfather telling me it's really, really important. So when it came to my brother, I made sure that we did all of those things and that. And I mean, nobody wants to see, their loved one like that, but it does. It helps you go through that process of doing that. Even when people don't like going to the graveside, that is another part of the process, and it actually helps. It helps give you a bit of that closure, and that as crazy as it sounds, when you're going through grief and upset with somebody. And I use the grief process for the forgiveness because you can really kind of see how so many people can't forgive. Because when you watch them go into the ground and the dirt and lowering and everything like that, it adds another piece of they're not coming back. They're not coming the way that they were. It gives you that other little piece of closure, of completion, of you're allowed to grieve because this part has finished. It's completed. And some people can't forgive because maybe the relationship just ended and there's no words, there's no conversations, there's all these unanswered things. Maybe a person has passed away and you never got to have that conversation with them. So there's the unanswered, questions. There's not that completion thing. So, somebody's upset you and you didn't get to talk through some of your emotions. They didn't get to be acknowledged or validated. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I say do forgiveness letters, because then you can at least write it down on a piece of paper and put it out there and have a little bit of that, that process of to be able to help you. There's sometimes when someone passes, you just can't do those kind of things. So you have to find another way. I've noticed, in those moments that when people don't get to do that, they are stuck in the process. They're stuck in their grief and they can't, move through it. When I went and when I realized that this young man didn't have anybody there, there was going to be no service, nothing. I just thought, well, that's not right. So not realizing what it did and shifted and everything like that, I said a prayer. I've been to enough funerals and things like that. I said a piece and everything for him. And I said forgiveness, like kind of a forgiveness kind of prayer. I don't even know what I said in the whole thing. And something just kind of shifted and lifted. And in that moment, I had that compassion and grace. And in that whole experience, I can honestly say I was never I wasn't mad anymore. I wasn't upset. I wasn't hurt. And in that whole thing, I was able to forgive him, I think, almost way easier than I honestly want to admit that I've forgiven like an ex or a friend that hurt me, or, your kids upset you and you hang on to something. I've hung on to all of that stuff way, way longer than that. Like that should have been, harder too. But because I did that little process and that, it just magically kind of does something and it releases it. And all the funerals and things that I've gone to, and you actually go through all the process and you go through all the stages, you get through it little, not really a little easier, but you get through it. You actually move through it. You're not just trying, like, and people say, oh, get over it. You don't get over it. You learn a new normal and you move through it. With my mom, it took a little bit longer and that to forgive her because I was like upset and everything else. I blamed her for a lot of what happened to my brother and that. And it wasn't until a couple of years, down the road, I was taking care of her and in a home, and I seen how, sometimes some of them, they treat her amazingly, some of them not so much. And you start to see different things in a home and how some of them are treated or how family members don't even show up or come around. And with my mom, I was mad at her. I didn't like her. I was like really mad at her and that, but I made a promise to my grandfather that I would take care of her. And I made a promise to my grandfather I would take care of my brother and my grandmother. And in order to take care of my grandmother, I had to take care of my mother. So I kind of begrudgingly did it, kind of thing. And it wasn't until I heard this one speaker speak and talk about what if, and I know I've said this in probably a few of my videos, but what if they're doing the best that they can do with the knowledge and the information that they have? And it got me thinking about my mom. And then I sat back and I thought, okay. And then he said, physically step out of your life and your shoes, step into that person's shoes. Imagine you going through the experiences that they've gone through. Now, would you have done any better? Could you have done anything different? Without what you know in this moment, go back at those times, even when you were those ages, the same way. Not with the knowledge and the information that you have right now, with what you knew back then. So for an example, for my mom, and I'll just do it kind of quick, snapshot. Back in the day, you couldn't talk about certain things and stuff like that. It was just, you just don't do it. So around 4 or 5 years old, my mom was molested for a bit of time. And it took my mom a while to get the courage to tell my grandmother. And my grandfather had a temper, never ever hurt my grandmother or touched her or my mom or anything. It's just that he was raised in abuse and his father was highly abusive and would beat his mom and family and stuff. So he promised my grandmother that he would never be that type of person. But God forbid if you ever, hurt my grandmother or one of us, that person get a beating. So my grandmother, when my mom told her when she was like 5 years old that this guy down the street, or might have worked with my grandfather, I don't know, not important, that he had done this to my mom. And when my mom finally got the courage to tell my grandmother, she's telling this 5-year-old, we have to keep it a secret because if dad finds out, he will kill this man, he'll go to jail, you'll never see him again. So in that moment, I sat back and went, okay, I lost my dad at 3 years old. I know what it did to me. I went into foster care when I was 6. I know what it feels like to be taken away from people that you love, and that I couldn't imagine not having my grandfather around. I lost him at 16, so I already kind of knew what it felt like to lose him, and that was pivotal enough for me. So I sat back and I went, and the difference, I can't sit there and go, okay, at 5 years old, what would I do? Because I'm stronger and tougher than my mom. I'm a different person, different personality. I've always taken care of her. So I was like kind of like the big sister. And my grandmother came from that whole perspective of, for me, she was going to be really, really tough on me, really kind of mean, and would say things to me that toughened me up. Some people thought I was a bit cold, get the nicknames, Ice Queen, things like that. So in that, I had to look at it as my mom is very passive, very soft and, so sensitive. So here, um, if you think about it, she is like 4 or 5 years old that has just been told that she has to keep this horrible secret that makes her feel absolutely horrible and not safe and not protected, and that she's done something wrong. Like she decided that she had to have done something wrong for this to happen to her. And she has to keep it a secret so that she doesn't lose her dad. He doesn't go to jail or kill somebody, do something horrific. So now she has to keep it a secret for a little bit of time because they were building their house and then moving in a few months or whatever the case may be. So kind of like suck it up and try to keep this person away as much as possible. Well, the more she would, my grandmother, would try to intervene or whatever, it would set off like, red flags or whatever. So I could only imagine what had happened in that time frame while this was happening. Fast forward when she's like about 14, 15 years old, a teenager, my grandmother used to tell us all the time, be home by this time. And if you don't, bad things will happen to you. And if they do happen to you, it's your fault because you didn't come home at your curfew time. Back in the day where they fear you into listening kind of thing. Well, of course, my mom was a few minutes late for whatever reason and cut across the park where you're not supposed to cut across. And when she cut across the park, a bunch of young teenage boys, hockey or whatever, at the ice rink, they grabbed a hold of her and pulled her into a hockey shack, and they brutalized her. They gang raped her. So she's like 14, 15 years old. So once again, I'm like, first of all, I ought to kick their butts, but that's me, right? I can't step into that and go because I've had a couple guys try to come after me, and my grandparents taught me how to clock them one. I'm different than her. My mom wasn't a fighter. And honestly, how many of us could have probably held off 5 or 6 people? Like, really? So, once again, she was thinking she's done something wrong, something bad. It's her fault. She was late. She can't tell her parents what had happened. And of course, who's going to show up into a house looking like you didn't get ruffled up a bit? What's the first thing the parents think? They think that you were messing around with a boy and that's why you were late. So then she gets in trouble. But now she's going to get in trouble for doing that. Or is she going to tell them the truth? Well, she's not going to tell them the truth. She's already been told at 5 years old, if you tell your father the truth, he would go out there and kill him, kind of thing. He'll go to jail. So of course she's not going to tell him. So then she gets into trouble. Both my grandparents were larger than life personalities, perfectionists. If you're going to do something, you do it right the first time. So my poor mom most times wouldn't want to do something because she didn't want to mess up and get into trouble. So, she met my dad when she was like 16, a year and a half after this incident, which was a saving grace because my dad was a very soft, passionate, quiet, shy, older gentleman, so kind of a nurturer, protector kind of person. But if you think about it, she met him at 16 and they were married by 19, had a child by 20, had a second child by 21, and he died when she was 22. Now, most of us at our ages, some of us have children, and we have children that are between 20 and 30 in there. I couldn't even imagine, and now I do. I have a couple of grandchildren, but most of them were past 21, past 22. They were older, 25 and up kind of thing. And I couldn't imagine them at 19, 18, 19, 20, 21 having children. So here I'm looking, and especially my mom, she didn't finish school, very, very anxious and nervous, had some of these illnesses because apparently she had MS since she was 17. We just didn't know what it was. So here is a young girl that is 22 years old, that has MS, that has a couple of other illnesses, has mental illness, trying to raise two children, lost her husband, and she's 22 years old. I don't know of how many people that could do a miraculous job raising children. And especially when you think that you've already done so much wrong and you can't do things right, and you have low self-esteem, low self-worth. And not because my grandparents, were like horrible or mean. They were just tough. They were strong. They were raised in a certain time frame, an era of a certain way. They were hardworking. They had high expectations. You said something, you did it. You honored your word, that kind of thing. So I couldn't imagine. So right there in that moment, all of a sudden, I had this compassion and this empathy and this understanding for my mom. She did the best she could with what she knew and what she had. And you can see it today. There's some people that have illnesses and they're not even nearly as bad as like my mom or some other people. And they're not doing that great. Or they're really living in a victim state and some of them, saving grace, they have people around them that can help them and support them. So when you see that, all of a sudden, it does something. It shifts. It makes you can forgive way easier, and it lifts, especially when you go into that place of, you walk in their shoes, you ask what would you have done in their situation. And some of us would have done something a little bit different, some of us would, but most of the time it's because we had information or an experience that they didn't have. So if we're really being honest, they either weren't raised the right, and of course my grandparents, they shifted the way that they raised me, um, thinking that they did a bunch of things wrong of why my mom was the way she was. So they raised me a little bit differently. And so there's just a little bit of, you know, how you can work through some of the forgiveness and switching the way that you think. And I found, like, when I think about it, and if you journal or you write and you ask yourself, um, right now, I can honestly say that in every single person that's in my life or out of my life, I don't hold no grudges. Um, I don't hold no ill will. I've really come to that place where I can really step into that. What if they're doing the best that they can do with what they have? And believe me, we all have our moments where certain people trigger us and we think, oh my goodness, come on. Do you really have to be like that? But within a few minutes or whatever, you sit back and go, maybe they've gone through something. Maybe they're having a horrible day. I know there's been a few times when I was driving on the road and I cut somebody off and they start honking and giving me the finger, and they didn't realize I was driving home from the hospital. I had just said goodbye to my grandmother. You know, it's like moments like that where now I sit there, and when somebody cuts me off and I almost want to get mad, I kind of sit back and go, wonder why. Wonder why they cut me off. Did they have a bad day at work? Did their wife just call them and say, hey, we have a sick child, we have to take him to the hospital? Or, your dad's not doing well, or your mom's not doing well, or, oh my goodness, the house is on fire. Like, who knows? Nowadays, it seems like everybody is ready to jump on somebody instead of realize that maybe they're going through something. Like, that was the other thing that my grandparents taught me. that when someone passes, you don't go to the funeral for you. You go for that family. Um, yeah, if you know the person and you care about them, you're going for your own process and for your own grief. But you actually are going to help them. They don't know in that moment that having all of those people there showing up helps and it does something, and on an energetic level and everything like that. And I'm telling you, there's nothing worse than sitting in a funeral with a few people and you look around and you don't see people that say that they care about you and love you, and they're not there, and they have excuses of why they didn't show up. And it does something. It really does something to the family and the people that are there. And we can't always show up, and there's times where you can't, but my grandfather used to tell me all the time, you either show up at the house or you give a call. Or he said, really, after the first initial few days, he said everybody goes back to life and they forget about the people, and the hardest times for the people is the week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 months, a year afterwards, when people aren't checking in with them anymore or not asking them how they're doing or avoiding them because they just don't know how to deal with them. And that, so, just a couple of little things that will help with it. I hope that this helped someone. This is just my experience of what I've experienced myself. And it's not scripted. It's just whatever, comes and I share. So have a great evening, and I hope this helps. And we'll talk to you later.